Well, welcome everyone. We're going to be discussing a topic that I find particularly interesting, the topic of civil disobedience, or to put it in simpler words, is it ever okay to break the law? So the definition of civil disobedience, what is it? It's basically the deliberate or public act of disobeying certain laws, government demands, or commands as a form of protest. And it's important to note that civil disobedience is normally non-violent and it's done to change laws or government policies as a form of protest, as I said earlier. However, this is the Cambridge Dictionary definition if you wish to have a look. So the key characteristics of civil disobedience: one, it's intentional and deliberate. So the people who are participating in acts of such know exactly what they're doing and have an intent and a goal in mind, which is normally to change laws or government policies because they're unhappy with them. It's done to protest against unjust laws or practices, as I just said, and it's always non-violent. It's never seen as an act of malice. It's always done as an act of protest. And these involved are often willing to accept the legal consequences of what they're doing, and they take full accountability of their actions because they have a goal in mind and want to achieve that. So familiar examples of civil disobedience, if you recognize any of these pictures, the first one I'm going to go into is the Boston Tea Party, where colonists illegally boarded ships and dumped tea into the Boston Harbor to essentially protest against British taxation without representation. The next example is the Indian independence movement, which was led by Gandhi, and protesters used non-violent resistance tactics such as boycotts, civil disobedience against British colonialistic rule. Another one is the American Civil Rights Movement, where activists employed sit-ins, boycotts, and peaceful marches to challenge racial segregation laws and demand equal rights. And the thing that all of these have in common is that they achieved that goal and have benefited society, and we all look back at them now and essentially thank what they did. The final one is a more recent example, which is Black Lives Matter, as you can see here, where millions across the world participated in protests, demonstrations, and acts of civil disobedience across the US and the world to globally oppose police brutality and systemic racism across the world. So before we go into it, I thought we should talk about the rule of law, which is the principle holds that all individuals, institutions, and entities are accountable for the laws that they essentially put into order. And this means that the laws are often published and accessible to all citizens, which is what this means. They're not secretly hidden, allowing everyone to know and understand the rules that they're expected to follow and understand the consequences that will follow if they break those rules. It also includes equally enforced. So this principle ensures that laws apply to everyone in the same way, regardless of their social status, wealth, or position of power. And it's the idea that essentially no one is above the law. The next characteristic is it's independently adjudicated, meaning that this refers to the concept that legal disputes are resolved by impartial judges or courts, free from outside influence or pressure from the government or often powerful entities that could change the outcome. And finally, it's consistent with the international human rights norms and standards, which means that essentially it matches up with all of the rights that are enforced across the world, and it enforces them basically. So the reason why I thought the rule of law would be important to include in this slide is because the rule of law is fundamental to democratic societies. It ensures fairness and prevents arbitrary governance, and it's closely tied to the talk of civil disobedience because when people engage in civil disobedience, they're essentially challenging the application and fairness of certain laws and want to see a change from them. And this creates a tension between respecting the overall system of law and opposing several laws that are in place. So some of the arguments for the decriminalization of civil disobedience is that it can be seen as a last resort to address severe injustices where other methods have failed. So often people resort to civil disobedience, as for example in the case with Black Lives Matter, when they feel that they have no choice. It recognizes that sometimes conventional challenges and channels may change ineffective, that they may have been blocked, leaving civil disobedience as their final viable option to see a change in laws or the systems that they live in. Second one is that it can draw attention to important issues that are often being ignored. So it's historically led to significant social and political changes, from women's suffrage rights to civil rights movements. And history shows us, as I showed in the slide before, that it is acts of civil disobedience that have often led to significant changes and often have been catalysts for major reforms and social progress within society. The third one is it has historically led to significant social and political changes. As I mentioned, it has often shown a big impact, and therefore the question of is it ever acceptable to break the law, everyone always finds it a touchy subject, but in effect, when we look at the things that have happened when people have chosen to break the law, it has brought about a big change. It can draw attention to important issues that are being ignored by disrupting the status quo or the norm of the society that we live in, and civil disobedience can force public discourse or neglected issues, making it harder for authorities and the public to turn a blind eye. For example, the entire world knew about the Black Lives Matter movement because it was such a big thing that was affecting everyone else's normal lives. And finally, it upholds moral principles when laws are unjust, meaning that this argument persists that there are moral imperatives to resist unjust laws, reflecting the idea that ethical considerations can sometimes outweigh strict legal compliance. That's fine. Moving on, some arguments against it. Some argue that it undermines the rule of law and could encourage general lawlessness. So some people may view it as, if it's okay to break the law as a form of protest, then why isn't it okay to break the law generally? When people break laws intentionally, it can weaken respect for the legal system and set a dangerous precedent that may encourage others to break the law as well, for less noble causes than civil disobedience. The second point is that there are usually legal means to seek change, such as voting or petitioning, other than just protesting. And there are other methods to achieve the same goal other than civil disobedience or breaking the law. And many argue that democratic systems provide legitimate ways and avenues for reform, making it unnecessary to resort to breaking the law as a form of civil disobedience. Third, it can be seen to disrupt the society and harm innocent bystanders. For example, if I use the example of Black Lives Matter, unfortunately, there were people that were injured and some that died as a result of the protest, because it's hard to control entire crowds of people at all times. Acts of civil disobedience such as protests or blockades can cause unrest within society, making it harder to achieve the goal and making it harder for people in power to see the movement that you're doing and make changes because of it. And fourth, it may not always lead to the desired changes and could backfire, as has been shown with the South Africa apartheid movement, where it took about a whole decade to achieve the intended outcome. And this essentially means that laws should respect and protect fundamental human rights as recognized by the international community, ensuring basic freedoms and dignity for all individuals. Moving on. The conclusion. So, is it ever okay to break the law was the question that I presented at the start of the talk. And as we've seen, there's no easy answer, as it's never guaranteed that certain change will occur. And civil disobedience has been a powerful tool for change throughout history, but it also raises complex legal and ethical questions about the way it's practiced and if there are other avenues that should be taken rather than going straight to breaking the law and protesting. And as I'm sure all of you are future legal professionals, it's crucial to be able to look at both sides of the argument and come to a conclusion. So for this talk, I've decided to leave it open, and based on both the for and against arguments, let you decide whether is it ever okay to break the law. And I'm going to finish from a quote by St. Augustine, which is, "An unjust law is no law at all," which I interpreted as meaning that if there's a law that you feel is unjust or doesn't have the intended outcome that it was made for, then it's almost not a loophole, but an invitation to challenge it. And whether that's through civil disobedience or more legal avenues, that should be okay and should be encouraged as laws are made to protect our society. Thank you.
I think we should turn off the video now so we can have a debate. How do you feel about that? That's really
Would not
good. Well
mind.
done.
Thank you.